Okay, I'll call the meeting to order, and for attendance, I see all the councillors are here. I have some opening remarks. The public meeting is being heard by the City Council Planning Advisory Committee, and public notice has been given in accordance with the Planning Act. The non-elected members of the Planning Advisory Committee are Mr. John Baltutis, Mr. David Joyce, Ms. Catherine Brown, and Mr. Paul Jennings. Citizen appointees may ask questions and participate in the discussion in order to assist in making recommendations to City Council, but may not make motions or vote in connection with the public meeting. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Planning Committee or City Council before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of City Council or the local Planning Appeal Board. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Belleville before the related bylaw is passed, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local Planning Appeal Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party. Comments received at this public meeting, as well as written comments, will be considered by the Planning Advisory Committee members, as well as the Engineering and Development Services Department, in analysis of the applications that were part of the public meeting tonight. A recommendation report will be brought forward upon receipt of all agency and public comments at a future meeting, and the Planning Advisory Committee's recommendations will be forwarded to City Council for consideration. Any person wishing to be advised of the Belleville Planning Advisory Committee's recommendations with respect to today's applications are requested to leave their name and address on the appropriate notification sheet located on the clipboard beside the podium. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and any general nature thereof. Seeing none. Public meeting 3.1, City of Belleville Municipal Comprehensive Review of Urban Service Area Official Plan Update. Mr. Ashton.
So this is a presentation tonight by the consultants who have undertaken the Municipal Comprehensive Review Report. Mr. Jamie Cook with Watson and Monica Belleville from Dillon Consultants. And they're to make a presentation. The report, as detailed in their comprehensive report, addresses phases 1 and 2 of the 4-step process. All the information is on the website. We just concluded a public information session downstairs in the meeting room, and the consultants are here to present the information to Council tonight.
Thank you very much, Steve. Good evening, members of council, Mr. Mayor, members of the public. It's a pleasure to be.
The mayor's not here. I'm just a councillor.
Okay,
I want that clear, and there's no coup. And then we have some citizen members as well, the Planning Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So good evening and welcome members of the public as well. So I'm Jamie Cook with Watson & Associates, and as Steve mentioned, I'm here with Monica Belleville from Dillon Consulting, and we're here to present the results of the city's comprehensive review study. The study is a background study that's being done to the guide the official plan update for the city of Belleville. So the outline of the presentation is that we're going to start with a brief introduction. I'm going to provide you a bit of a policy context of the framework that we're working with within the provincial and the city context. Then we'll get right into the results of the population, housing, and employment forecast. I have some information on trends, but I've moved that to the back just to save time. Then from there, we'll deal with the long-term urban land needs, looking out over a 20-year time horizon of both residential, commercial, and industrial, or what we call employment lands. And then Monica will provide an overview of the policy recommendations, and then we'll wrap it up with conclusions. So as I mentioned, the study is being done as part of as required by the Planning Act as an update to the city's official plan. This is a required study that will inform the city's long-term urban land requirements over a 20-year time horizon. I mentioned the firms that are undertaking the work. So this is a key comprehensive study that really informs a lot of the key technical background analysis that is being used to guide long-term decision-making with respect to the vision of the city and its official plan. The study is being done in 4 phases. The first 2 phases are really the technical work that's being done. Phase 1 and 2 are the technical demographic and market analysis, review of supply and demand, and ultimately conclusions on land needs. And then phase 2 forms the policy recommendations, which will then form the draft official plan amendment in phase 3, which will be completed in September of 2019, followed by the finalization of the official plan amendment in January of 2020. To date, we've had a fairly extensive stakeholder consultation. We've met with the city's staff and economic development staff and planning as well regarding a number of the key inputs to the study from a technical standpoint and from a policy standpoint. We had 2 meetings with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to discuss the draft findings of the report, and then we held a public information session, as Steve pointed out earlier today. So just to provide you a little bit of background on the policy context, the provincial policy statement, the 2004 PPS, really sets the overall framework for long-term land use development and growth management issues within Ontario. The PPS also guides direction related to residential and non-residential land requirements over a 20-year planning horizon, as I've mentioned. Some of the key directions from the 2014 PPS include directing growth and development to settlement areas. That's a key priority and focus for growth across all of Ontario. The need to provide sufficient land up to a 20-year planning horizon. So the PPS allows municipalities to designate land over a 20-year period in their official plan. You can plan for land longer than 20 years. You can look at servicing issues longer than 20 years, but you can't designate land beyond a 20-year time horizon in accordance with the PPS. It also requires that intensification is looked at. So it's really stressing now in the 2014 an intensification first policy when it comes to urban development within Ontario. So as part of that, we've looked at intensification opportunities from both the supply and demand side over the 20-year period. It also speaks to a number of policies regarding employment lands, specifically the preservation of employment lands, as well as the promotion of economic development and competitiveness, which directly speaks to the city's industrial land base and its export-based market potential. So this graph here provides a long-term forecast of the population forecast to 2041. So we've gone out to 41. The land requirements that we've looked at extend to a 20-year period to 2038, from 18 to 38. When we completed the base population and supply data. We also, just to be clear, we started the study back in 2013, prepared a draft report. The report ultimately did not move forward at that time and was subsequently re-established in 2017 and 18 at that time period to relook at the longer term forecast. And ultimately the land requirements that came out of that. What we found is that we're actually tracking pretty well to the previous forecast that was done in 2013. We were about roughly about just 800 population off the 2016 census. We're projected to grow relatively comparable to where we were projected to grow in the previous study, to about just under or just over 58,000 people by 2041. That represents an increase of about 6,400 people within the city over that long-term time period. It represents an annual growth rate of about 0.5%. So just to put that into context, the province is growing at a rate of about 1%, but I always like to preface that the province, growth in the province is dominated by some very large urban centers, I would include the Greater Golden Horseshoe as one large urban center that would be picked up in that, as well as the Greater Ottawa region. Those regions are growing faster than the province as a whole, so they tend to skew the overall rate of growth in the province. Most areas outside of those large urban centers are growing at a rate well below 1%. So Eastern Ontario, I don't have the stat right in front of me, but it's growing at just slightly above about 0.7% or so, with Ottawa included. So you're growing at a slightly faster rate than some of the smaller communities within Eastern Ontario, and a more relative rate to the mid-sized areas like Kingston, for example. One of the factors that's moderating the population growth is the aging of your population, and this is something that's mentioned quite a bit in the report. And we'll get into this in the next couple slides, but what this tends to do is that as the population ages, you've got really two sources of growth that you can rely on for your population to grow. One is net migration from international sources outside of Ontario or within Ontario, and the other source is natural increase, so that's births, less deaths. As your population ages, you tend to see more deaths and less births, and so population from natural increase is actually projected to become negative over the long term, which is putting a lot more pressure on net migration as a source of population growth, which is why you start to see that bending of the population in the longer term period, because of the fact that your population is aging and putting that downward pressure on growth. Just another point to note as well is that aging of the population also affects your labor force. So your population is aging, but your labor force is also aging, and that also puts strains on your ultimate economic growth as well. So you're very reliant on net migration to grow, which is a key takeaway from all this. And even with a steady amount of net migration, you're likely not going to see a fast rate of growth in the future, but as you said, a moderate rate of growth. So this is a graph of the overall population age structure, and I think what's really striking in this graph is that, yes, the population's aging, and it's not. We've broken up the 55 plus category into two categories, because it's not really all of the 65 plus category that's seeing the most of the growth. It's really the 75 plus category that's growing the most. It's projected to increase from 10% of the population to about 22% of the population as a proportion by 2041. So it's more than doubling in proportion. And a lot of that increase in the proportion is really just as a result of the aging of the existing population. It's not as impacted by migration. There will be some migration in that category, but most of the migration will be in the age groups under 75. But because of the existing bulge of the population in that older cohort, and right now in the 55 plus age group moving forward, this is the age group that's going to see a lot of growth. The youth population 0 to 19 is expected to see a slight decline in proportion. I believe all the segments of the population are expected to see some growth, but as I've been pointing out, it's the older 75 plus population that is expected to see the most growth. This is a graph of the housing forecast over the 16 to 41 period relative to the last 15 years. We've been experiencing, as you probably noticed, a lot of development activity in the last several years in Belleville. I think it's really been a key, I guess, a factor of that demand is really the city's attractiveness to the 55 plus age group, but we're also seeing market demand in all key demographic segments: first-time home buyers, families, empty nesters, and seniors. So we are projecting that in the next 5 years, the rate of growth will be quite a bit above the historical average, and we've already got a pretty good window on what that development activity is going to look like based on the permit activity that's been reviewed to date. That rate of growth is expected to moderate over the long term, again, as a result of the aging of the population and the labor force. But the overall average is expected to be about 900 every 5-year period, which is about 180 units a year that we're anticipating on average. Relative to the historical period, that's slightly higher, which was about 800 every 5 years or 160 annually. The other important thing to point out is that the structure of housing is expected to continue to evolve and change. As the population ages, we are expecting to see a greater increase in the demand for high-density housing and medium-density housing forms, and a shift away from the proportion of low density. We still do expect to see a substantial amount of low density development, but we also expect to see a broader range of product types being offered, largely to accommodate that aging population base, but also given the increases in the price of housing and affordability issues, we're seeing a greater demand for other housing forms other than single detached low density. Another thing to point out is just a stat here that's showing the average occupancy of a house. So this is an important stat for demographers and planners, because what it's doing is it's showing the overall average number of people who live in a unit in Belleville, and that's important to draw the connection between the amount of population growth we're going to have and the amount of housing we'll need to accommodate that growth. And so you can see what's happening is the average occupancy rate is going down. In 2006, it was about 2.47. In 2016, it dropped to 2.39. It's expected to continue to fall to 2.22 as a result, largely of the aging of the population. What that means is that if you were to not experience any housing growth, your population would decline over the long-term period because of the declining occupancy levels in existing households. It also puts a little bit of downward pressure again on your overall rate of population growth. This is not a unique issue, and most of the issues I'm talking about here are not unique to Belleville. These are issues, demographic issues, that the majority of Ontario are facing, and are similar to the trends that we're experiencing in the surrounding area of Eastern Ontario. This is a graph of the employment forecast. Over the 25-year period, we are expecting to see a moderate amount of employment growth relative to the population forecast. It's about the same rate of growth, about 0.5%. That red line there above is what that is showing is the relative activity rate, or it's just a fancy way of saying the ratio of jobs to population. And in 2016, you had a ratio of about 65%. So you had a healthy ratio of jobs to existing population. Part of that is because the city does serve as a regional service center to the surrounding area. You have a lot of in-commuters coming in to work in Belleville. You have more people coming in to work than leaving in the community. And you're a relatively self-contained employment market. And so that has produced a fairly high employment activity rate. In terms of the rate of growth, or the amount of growth, we're projecting about 4,000 additional jobs over the 25-year period. In terms of the share of jobs, the largest component of those jobs are expected to be in the commercial and population-related sectors in the light blue. So that includes retail, non-retail, commercial, as well as potential office development, professional services, business services are all lumped into that commercial population-related category. So as your population grows, we expect to see additional retail and commercial service population growth. We also expect to see additional institutional development, both related to services related to healthcare, for example, and education. About 28% of the employment growth is also projected in the industrial sector. We've obviously had some significant structural changes in the economy over the last decade. We saw some losses in the manufacturing sector, some fairly significant losses in Ontario and regionally. Those losses have more or less started to stabilize around 2013, and they've been gradually rebounding a little bit in the manufacturing sector. So we do expect to see some modest growth coming back in manufacturing, probably more in the small-scale manufacturing sectors. We also would expect to see some growth in logistics as well, given the city's proximity on the 401 corridor. As well, with population growth, we'd expect to see development in the construction sector as well. And lastly, there's two sectors here. They're not really sectors, they're really more categories. One is work at home, and so as the economy continues to shift towards more knowledge-based sectors, and with advancements in telecommunications, we tend to see growth increasing in proportion in the work at home category, as well as in the no fixed place of work category. So no fixed place of work represents, it's really a labor force statistic, but it's been used in many of the employment forecasts out there that are done provincially, so we've included it. It includes those that don't go to the same place at the beginning of each shift, so we don't really know where they work, but they're captured in the labor force, and they're captured in the local economy. These are people like traveling salesmen, truck drivers, IT consultants that maybe may travel from one building to another throughout the week. So overall, that represents about another 17% of the employment growth. So moving on to the residential land needs, as part of this analysis, we looked at both the supply and the demand for residential and non-residential development. In terms of the residential supply, there's a total of about 9,600 unit potential that we've identified within the development pipeline. So those are applications that are currently being reviewed and are active plans that have some form of approval status or have been received by city staff that aren't yet approved. We also, and so that number totals about 2,100 units. We also looked at the potential land available in the Loyalist secondary plan area. There's about 3,600 potential units that aren't active in plans in the Loyalist area, in the central area. And then in addition to that, there's about another just under 1,500 additional designated greenfield lands that are identified in this map in the dark green and light green that were identified that are not active in active plans. And then lastly, we identified about 2,350 units that could potentially be developed through intensification in the city center. So again, in total, that generates about 9,600 total units in the inventory. In terms of the demand forecast, the demand is significantly lower than that overall supply. We've identified, as I already pointed out, an average of about 180 units a year. Over the 20-year period, that worked out to about 3,200 units. And actually, when you include the secondary suites, it's another 100. So second suites are additional apartment units that we've identified that could be accommodated and occupied within existing, primarily low-density residential housing. So we have a total demand of about 3,300 units over the 20-year period. About 77% of that's been identified as development in the greenfield area, and about 23%, including the secondary suites, within the built-up area or the city center area through intensification. Relative to historical trends, the amount of intensification that you've been achieving over the last 5 years has been about 15% of total demand. So 23% does represent a slight upward shift relative to the last 5 years, but we feel with the aging of the population and some of the potential opportunities that are arising in the city center for development that target is a reasonable target. So when we put this together, we looked at supply and demand and then ultimately the need. And what this graph here shows is the overall demand of just the greenfield development of about 2,540 units compared to the supply of greenfield lands outside of anything in the built-up area or the city center area, I guess largely the downtown area. I want to note that we've excluded the Loyalist secondary plan central zone in this table. In the report, we do show the overall need with and without the central area of the Loyalist secondary plan. But given the servicing challenges that we've identified, that have been identified within the central area of the Loyalist area, and the uncertainty right now of the future development of that area, this graph here excludes that land, and we've shown it both ways to ensure that we have an appropriate handle on the overall amount of need for land within Belleville over the next 20 years, with and without those central area lands in Loyalist. Without those lands, there's still a small surplus of about 550 units. So over the 20-year period, we don't see a need for additional land right now for residential. It's relatively tight. There's 550 units is not a lot of units, but it's enough units right now to satisfy that we don't need to look at expanding boundaries for residential development in the Greenfield area at this time. Just quickly on the commercial side, we did look at both retail and, as I mentioned, non-retail commercial uses. We looked at the existing inventory. A significant amount of the existing retail spaces in general apparel, merchandise, about 43%. There's a range of various other retail categories that we looked at in the existing inventory. There are a number of retail areas that were explored within the city. And just showing the overall rate, the existing vacancy rate, you can see that the vacancy rate within the city's retail nodes really does vary considerably, from about 16% in the Dundas Street East area to about, I guess it's 2% in South and Southwest Belleville, 1% in some of the other areas. We've identified that the overall vacancy rate's around 8%. A healthy vacancy rate is somewhere in that 8 to 10% range. So the overall rate of retail vacancy is relatively healthy, but regionally, or I guess more locally within the city, there are certain areas that have a much higher rate of vacancy than others. Based on the amount of commercial and population-related employment, we've identified about 14 hectares of additional commercial land that would be required to accommodate that commercial forecast. The stat is around, I think it was around 600,000 square feet of additional commercial space that would be needed. Some of that space can be accommodated with an existing retail space in that vacant space that we identified. The other requirement would be filled within vacant commercial lands to support that 14-hectare total. As you can see, the supply of commercial land is quite significant. There's a supply of 234 hectares of land, so we've identified that there's a significant surplus of commercial. We don't need to look at expanding the boundary for commercial land at this time either. So we also looked at the city's industrial, or what we call employment land inventory. Currently, there are a number of existing and established industrial areas within the city of Belleville. There's a total of about 568 net hectares, or about 1,400 net acres of developed employment land within the urban area. As you can see, most of the city's newer employment areas are located around the 401 corridor, including the Canada East Industrial Area, the Northeast Industrial Area as an example. Some of the older areas are established along the southern areas of the city and along the waterfront. Historically, the city's been averaging about 4 hectares of land absorption per year. It's a relatively modest amount of absorption, and you can see it's been relatively uneven over the last 10-year period. Part of the challenge is that the city's supply of municipally owned land is very limited at this time, so the city doesn't have a lot of land to actually market right now that's shovel-ready or service land that could be sold and developed for industrial or employment purposes. There are other lands that are designated and privately owned. Much of this land is not serviced, and there are some issues with the overall marketability of land in some of these areas, and ultimately the the asking price for this land for development. Some of these things are limiting the absorption of land in the industrial sector. Based on the amount of industrial employment that we projected, what we've done here is we've taken the amount of industrial employment as well as other uses that can be accommodated on these employment lands. There's other permitted uses in the commercial sector, as well as some ancillary retail that would also be permitted based on the current designation and zoning within the city, that would allow a little more than just the industrial forecast to be accommodated in the employment areas. So that works out to about 1,200 jobs over the 20-year period. Then we take that number and divide that by an average density of about 15 jobs per hectare to get an overall land requirement of about 81 hectares of land. So when we compare the overall amount of demand to supply, we've identified a small surplus of about 19 hectares of employment land over the long term that are still not absorbed at the 20-year period. However, while there is a small surplus of employment land, we've also recognized that, based on my previous comment, that a lot of the land supply that's currently within the city's urban area that's designated is not necessarily marketable or has servicing issues to develop. A lot of these lands that I'm speaking of are in the Canifton employment area up here. And through our review in this MCR and discussions with the city as well as the province and working with Dylan, we've identified a recommendation to remove about 276 hectares of lands that are designated within the Canifton employment area, to then essentially expand the boundary of the northeast employment area by about 166 hectares. So overall, we're still reducing the overall surplus of land. If we include all of these additional lands in the Canifton area, we're reducing that surplus by about 110 hectares, but we're acknowledging that there's a need for more city-owned shovel-ready land to be available to the city over the 20-year period to ultimately market, service, and develop. So as part of this assignment, we also looked at employment conversions. So the province identifies it as part of a municipal comprehensive review. You can also look at the conversions of employment uses to non-employment uses, but that has to be done through a comprehensive assessment of the overall need for employment lands over the long-term period, as well as the need for the potential use that we're converting to. So the province identifies a very broad framework for converting employment lands, largely based on need and servicing and multi-jurisdictional issues. But we also wanted to add more localized criteria to evaluating the overall potential for conversions. And I want to be clear that the PPS takes a very protectionist view of employment lands. It's looking to preserve and ensure that employment lands aren't converted unnecessarily. But there are some circumstances where an established industrial area no longer may make sense to continue to be an industrial area based on a previous planning decision or some other development issue that's rendered that site to be relatively less marketable or undesirable for employment. So we've identified a number of criteria. I'm not going to walk you through all the criteria, but I just wanted to show you that there was a fairly exhaustive review of a number of sites within the city of Belleville that were identified as candidates for conversion. In total, there was about 6 sites that were identified, including the Nortel site. This site is being recommended for conversion. It's a relatively fragmented parcel outside of the established employment area to the east. It's surrounded by residential on 3 sides. And for those purposes, mainly those purposes, we've identified that site to be recommended for conversion. We also identified a number of sites in the south area of the city for conversion as well. These sites are really part of a legacy of manufacturing development that was underway in this area. Historically, many of these jobs have left the area or been relocated to other areas of the city. In total, there's 5 sites here that are being recommended for conversion. Overall, the sites are relatively fragmented. They don't really represent a well-defined employment precinct. And so given that fragmented and scattered nature of the designation, we feel these sites would be better utilized for residential and mixed-use purposes in the future. And so these sites are also being recommended for conversion to a residential designation with the potential for some mixed-use development as well. I'm going to turn over to Monica, who's going to summarize the policy recommendations.
Thank you, Jamie. So there are 31 official plan policy recommendations included in the report, which were all developed based on the outcomes of the analysis that Jamie just went through. I'll provide an overview of some of the key pieces, but first I want to touch on another key component that was mentioned briefly at the start of the presentation as well, which is to address the updates to the Planning Act and the Provincial Policy Statement, the PPS, to ensure consistency. So the Planning Act is the enabling legislation that guides planning and development in Ontario. It enables the creation of the official plans, which are the municipality's primary means to control the development, to ensure that it's directed towards appropriate locations, to make sure it doesn't occur haphazardly, create land use conflicts, increase servicing costs, and or degrade the environment. So to provide guidance for the official plans, the Planning Act enables the provincial policy statement that Jamie mentioned. These statements of the province's policies concerning land use are intended to support the long-term approach to planning. They provide direction on all land use decisions that are matters of provincial interest, and that what's important is that the official plans must be in conformity with all of the policies of the PPS. And since the adoption of Belleville's current official plan, there have been changes to both the Planning Act and the provincial policy statement. So there are several changes to policy areas that need to be addressed to make sure that the plan conforms to this guiding legislation. And all of these changes must be done to the satisfaction of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, who is the ultimate approval authority. So all this work will be done concurrently with the incorporation of the findings of the MCR report. So I'll just touch on a few of those key pieces that Jamie just spoke to. So first, addressing the urban boundary expansion. So with the sufficient residential land to service the growth needs over the next 20 years, the policy will just indicate that no urban boundary expansion is required to service the growth until that time frame, 2038. But note that with the 5-year review, this will be looked at again in 5 years. So even though it's a 20-year plan, it does get reviewed every 5 years to make sure things are still going as projected. And then next, in regards to promoting intensification, so this needs to be done in appropriate areas to support the efficient use of infrastructure to contribute to the city's strong and vibrant downtown. So that will be done through the incorporation of those urban and rural growth targets to direct development primarily to urban areas and to limit rural growth. Next, the commercial intensification. So similarly, making sure that's directed to the appropriate areas, since we know that there's more than enough. So avoiding the designation of new commercial areas so that we focus on those lands that are already available and make sure that those are being used to their best capacity. And then in regards to the Loyalist secondary plan, we want to add phasing policies for that, which are tied to the servicing constraints of the central zone. So that was identified in the city's 2011 South Loyalist Secondary Plan Area Specific Development Charge Background Study, and Area Specific Bylaw, which is the longest title of a report I've heard. So policies will be included to prioritize the servicing of the most financially viable portions of that plan area to ensure that the lands are developed in accordance with planned infrastructure investments and prevent the development of those lands that are not immediately serviceable. And then in regards to Jamie's last couple points on the employment land conversion and the employment land exchange, so the official plan will reflect those changes in the policy as well as the mapping. But policies for phasing will also be added to the Northeast industrial area to similarly make sure that it's developed in a way that servicing can be provided in a timely manner, so you're not developing areas that are not serviceable in the near future. So again, this was just a very high-level overview of some of those key changes that came out of the MCR, and the report provides more detailed information on those policy directions. And then as we move forward to update the official plan based on the results of this Phase 1 and Phase 2 work and the updates to the Planning Act and the provincial policy statement, we will continue ongoing consultation with the ministry to make sure that everything is going in line with them. We'll also look at some of the emerging policy issues that are included in our expanded terms of reference, which were based on the recent council resolution to look at affordable housing. So things like providing enabling policies for a housing community improvement plan, housing CIP. So we'll be taking a closer look at those items as well. And then last but certainly not least, we will be asking for community input. Both today we had some chance to get some feedback, but once we actually have the drafted official plan, we'll be coming back to the public for some more feedback. I'll turn it back over to Jamie.
Thanks, Monica. So just to conclude, so as we mentioned, in terms of residential land requirements, we've identified that the city does have sufficient supply right now, based on a review of supply and demand to accommodate housing development over the next 20 years. So no further expansion is being recommended at this time, but we have noted that future urban expansions north of Highway 401 should be considered as part of the city's next official plan review. We do expect at that point in time, subject to the future development of the central area within the Loyalist secondary plan, a need for future expansion could be identified at that time. We've also identified that there's no need to expand the existing boundary to identify or provide for any more commercial development. A significant amount of land has been identified within the city's urban area. There's a substantial amount of development that we're expecting to, or a large share of development that we're expecting to see occurring in the downtown area. Some of that development will also be occurring within existing sites and in vacant building space. So again, we have a sufficient supply of commercial lands over the 20-year period. And then with respect to employment lands, we have identified that again, that there is a sufficient supply of land, while there's a sufficient supply of land to accommodate the city's needs over the long-term period from a more sort of theoretical standpoint, when we look at the marketability and the serviceability and developability of those sites, we are expected to see challenges in terms of the city's ability to accommodate a new industry, largely in those export-based industrial sectors. There's challenges to accommodate those uses on existing lands within the city of Belleville, and so, as I mentioned, we are recommending removing a large portion of land, about 276 gross hectares, from the urban service area to be designated as agriculture, and in exchange, recommending adding 166 gross hectares of land that are currently agricultural lands immediately east of the Northeast industrial area and designating those lands as employment area. And just as a final note, we've noted that even though we're looking to add additional lands to the city's urban area, Given the land swap that we're recommending, that would ultimately reduce the overall surplus of land in the city by about 110 hectares. This recommendation wouldn't exacerbate the oversupply of employment land within the city, and it would further complement and strengthen the developability of the Northeast industrial area. So that concludes our presentation. We're happy to take any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Cook and Ms. Bellevue. Is there any questions from the committee members? Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Jamie and Monica, and that's it's an incredible report. I think really, when we look at the economic side, it really answers a lot of questions when we look forward on growth and ways that we're looking at land and how we can use that and how we can look at numbers to what you have as 2041 down the road. Just a couple of questions. When we talk about housing demand, you were looking at historic numbers, is that correct, to really ascertain those numbers? So you said an average of about 210 units or 200 units produced a year, and you're looking at demand of about 3,200, which would be from 2018 to 2038. Were you looking also, do you look deeper into market forces, or are you looking more at historic and more stat can?
No, we do look at those more broader macroeconomic issues and then regional issues. I provided the context of the historical demand to provide you some idea of how you're growing in the future relative to how you're growing in the past, but we always want to make sure we don't put too much weight into that historical demand because it could be constrained or there could be issues. We know that when you look at the data in the last from 2001 to 2011, things were not so rosy in the overall regional economy, and that spilled into 2016. And so, we appreciate there's recessions that are going to happen in the future, most likely, but you had a number of periods in the previous 15 years that would have had some constraints to your overall growth. So that's one thing I just would want to just caveat about the historical demand. But the other thing I wanted to really point out is that the economic model that we're looking at here is first looking at the broader economic potential of the regional economy within Belleville and the surrounding economic area. So basically that's defined as the commuter shed. I think that forms a good definition of the regional economy within Belleville. And within that regional commuter shed, we look at how the population is growing, how employment is growing, what's happening with the labor force, and ultimately that connection with labor force growth and population growth is ultimately what drives housing. So first we have labor. Without labor force growth and job creation, there's not much need for net migration, except for the 65 plus category, which is significant, but not the only driver of net migration in Belleville. And then once we've identified the population potential based on that net migration, then we can look at household formation. And household formation is really the direct link between population growth by the age of the population and the need of that population has for housing. And so with an aging population, you're going to need more housing per person because the PPUs are lower. If you had a younger population, like say the town of Milton, it's younger relative to Belleville, it needs less housing per person because of the higher occupancy of units. So that's a high-level overview of how the model kind of comes together, and the historical data is just there to help provide context.
Okay, and great, and that's great. And the only challenge I'd have on that is in the real estate market in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen extraordinary trends that are pushing housing higher. And when we look and we've talked to those industries over the years, and we asked home builders specifically too why we can't build more homes, it's not the restraint of the market forces, it's because we don't have a lot of skilled labor. And we have a shortage of skilled labor. So when we saw a dip, or 1 year was an anomaly where I think at 1 year we were at 400 or 500 units for Belleville, which was extraordinarily high. It was because builders pushed themselves to push based on demand, but then found they couldn't build those homes. We didn't have the right skilled labor, so they've tailored that back. And what we're seeing now in the market is where we had housing prices last year and something that was great of $268,000. This year, those houses are about $334,000, and why the increase is because the demand is so high and we just are not building enough homes. So one of the things we'll probably look at, perhaps with economic development, would be more ways to produce more homes. We also have some different employment figures like HEXO in town and Costco and some other things. So my question would be, I like that you said a 5-year review, so we can relook at that. But is there wiggle room that if we find that we need more homes, is something needed before 5 years, or do you think 5 years is enough to go back and relook at that housing demand and supply?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't see, so I do, those are great observations, and we were looking at that as well, seeing, the amount of development activity that's been happening in the recent years, and thinking, wow, like this is impressive that, you've sort of turned a corner and you're seeing a significant amount of housing. And these issues that you're experiencing on labor force shortages you're not unique on this. I just finished a study in Kingston. They're experiencing the same challenges. So they're looking at, youth retention, labor force retention strategies, immigration strategies. So that may be one, from an economic development standpoint, that may be something that you need to be looking at, because obviously without labor, you really can't grow your local economy. The other thing I would just say too on that is that one thing we're finding is that while housing is more affordable, and this is something I'm presuming you're going to be continuing to look at through your housing strategy, while housing is more affordable in Belleville than it is in the GTA, for example, and competitive to the surrounding market, there's still a need for a more diverse form of housing to accommodate that labor. And so there's going to be labor that's going to be looking for rental housing, looking for apartments, and so you need to ensure that you've got the right mix and diversity of housing. So those are things that obviously need to be continually monitored on an annual basis. The need for future housing, I don't think is, as I've pointed out, we don't think there's an urgency to look at expanding boundaries at this point to accommodate that need. It is something that needs to be reviewed, and if you do decide to open up this before 5 years, there's nothing precluding you to doing that. You can update your official plan sooner than the time period that we've identified. But given the amount of time it takes to go through the process of doing a comprehensive review and a zoning or official plan, I should say, official plan amendment, I should say, sorry, you probably will need at least a 5-year period. But we don't see an urgency at this point. Okay.
Any other questions? Councillor Kelly.
Through Mr. Chair, question for Mr. Cook. I enjoyed that report, lots of information, and gives us something to think about. One of the things that I took note of, 55 plus, this Belleville seems to be a hotbed, and 75 plus is going to be, is it the highest demographic in the city? Will that,
yeah,
it's the fastest growing demographic?
It's the fastest growing demographic.
Okay,
yeah.
So when I look at that, I look, do we have enough healthcare facilities with our partners with Hastings County, long-term care, health services? And this is not a shot at those 70, 75 plus, but the older we get, we might need some assistance in our healthcare needs. When you were putting this research together, did you look at that, or did you think about that yourself, that you said, wow, I wonder if there's enough? Because I know the long-term care, I think the average wait is 2 to 3 years to get in. When you're pushing these numbers up, every day is a gift if you're healthy, because you don't know what's ahead of you. So did you think about that, or should we be looking at that?
It's a good question. It goes a little beyond the scope of the study that we've prepared in terms of the specific need for healthcare and healthcare services and infrastructure and even labor. But we have looked at, and to be clear, we haven't done a detailed employment forecast at the specific sectoral level. We've done it at the major levels of industrial, commercial, institutional. So there could be more work done to look at both labor and employment at a more detailed employment level. Not to get into the weeds, but StatsCan calls them NAICS categories. It's the classification system that they use to break down sectors. There's about 16 of them in total at the first level. So more work likely does need to be done. We have broadly taken into account that as the population ages, you're going to see growth in those institutional sectors, and probably less growth in education, but more growth in healthcare. So we have projected a steady amount of institutional employment, but whether that how that number relates to existing service levels, I can't really precisely comment on.
I'll add something.
Okay.
As part of our expanded terms of reference to look into the affordable housing, we are going to also take a look at age-friendly city policies as well to see if there's any room to add policies that would help people to age in place and make sure that the community is being set up for people to remain in the community as long as they can as a way to address some of those concerns. So that is something we're going to look at going forward from the policy side.
Any further questions? No? Okay. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
So since we're in the public meeting portion, is there anyone else wishing to speak regarding the municipal comprehensive review?
Thank you, Chairman Carr and members of the Planning Committee and staff. My name is Ruth Ferguson Althouse, and I have a very brief presentation with respect to the comprehensive review, and I provided some written comments as well for the committee and directed to Stephen Ashton. Had an opportunity to attend the PIC this afternoon and have reviewed the MCR report, and my submissions made on behalf of Settlers Ridge Developments, Inc. I thought there might be a drawing that shows the current urban serviced land use designations here on the screen, and there's not. I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with what the official plan urban area looks like, but in any event, I'll make my presentation in absence of that. But as you've heard from the consultants, there's a significant portion of the supply in the city of Belleville that they believe is not possible to be serviced, and it's approaching 40% in the central zone of the Loyalist secondary plan area. So a pretty significant portion that the consultants and the city staff are recognizing and are reviewing, that there are in fact some pretty significant servicing constraints to that area. And the northern boundary of the city as well, that was part of the former Canifton secondary plan area, which was brought into the official plan in 2000 from the former Thurlow Township secondary plan for that area without being reviewed at all, also contains lands that are designated residential that are not possibly or likely to be serviced. And they are very similar, in fact, I would argue, as the employment lands that the consultant is asking or recommending should be removed from that former Canifton secondary plan area. So that is something that the city would be undertaking to do at this time as part of the official plan review. However, the residential lands in that area and that northern boundary, which is, I would argue, is very irregular and not necessarily based, certainly not on servicing strategies and the likelihood of those lands to be serviced, but in fact were based on decisions that were made by the former Thurlow Council in and around 1988. So those were carried forward in 2000, and then they're now being carried forward again as part of this official plan review without essentially being reviewed in any sort of fashion. So we did want to bring that to your attention, and we've talked to the consultants and the staff about that. One of the trends that's very recent, that there was a report, and I know that several of you tweeted it recently, that the city of Belleville and Trenton are one of the 10 fastest appreciating secondary cities, drawing first-time buyers for reasons of housing affordability in the province. So this is a very new report that's come out, and very interesting. I think the trends we're seeing in the city, not just attracting the in-migration of the 55-plus age group, which we've known about for the last decade or so, but in fact that younger persons are also moving to the area, attracted to the lower housing prices in Belleville, and they're seeking primarily low-density housing. We would certainly agree that there's going to be increased demand for the higher density housing. That's been identified in the Watson's report with the aging of the population, but at the same time would argue that there's a good likelihood that the city of Belleville and Trenton are also going to be attracting the younger households, younger persons seeking lower housing prices. The submission that I've made this evening in writing is that Settlers Ridge Developments owns lands that can be readily serviced to the north to the existing pipelines. The developer in the city has actually invested in infrastructure in this area over the past 10 to 15 years. This land that I've highlighted in the submission this evening includes a stormwater management pond that's actually part of the urban serviced area. So we're requesting a very minor amendment to the settlement boundary that recognizes the stormwater management facility, as well as the abutting 1.9 hectares of residential lands to the east. And this additional residential and stormwater lands would enable the developer to complete the community to the pipeline, which would then form a natural and logical boundary to the urban area in this location. We would submit that, as mentioned, there's been infrastructure investments through this area by the city, and one of those has been the extension of the Sydney Street water main, that by allowing for this modest increase in residential land, it would allow the city to recoup more of those costs through development charges. So finally, as mentioned, there is this 5-year review that we're requesting that the city ensure be undertaken so that in 2025, the review of the supply for land for low-density housing be undertaken. We feel that there's a lot of vacant land within the current urban boundary that is not been assessed as to whether or not it can actually be serviced. And we feel that while you may have a significant supply, on the other hand, it may not have the potential to be serviced. And this is something the city, like with the employment land, should be drawing its attention to in the upcoming years, recognizing that you do have a lot of work on your plate right now with the official plan review that's been delayed for quite some time now, and recognizing the urgency of that, but would request that the city consider this residential supply and the ability of that land to be serviced be undertaken in 5 years, and not to wait another 20 years to do that. That has happened this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee members? No? Thank you very
Thanks.
much. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the municipal comprehensive review? Okay, seeing none, I get a motion to receive that. Councillor Williams, Councillor Culhane, all in favor? That motion's carried. 3.2, notice of revised applications and an introductory public meeting for applications for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended, and proposed plan of subdivision and plan of common elements condominium, 427 Farnham Road, former township of Thurlow, now city of Belleville, county of Hastings, file number B-77-1079 and 12 CD-19001. Owner is Heritage Park JV. Applicant agent is RFA Planning Consultant Incorporated. Mr. Ashton.
So an initial application for a proposed amendment to the zoning bylaw, in addition to draft plan of subdivision and a draft plan of common elements condominium, containing a total of 13 townhouse dwelling units, was considered during a public meeting April 1st. A number of concerns were raised by the public during this meeting. A significant number of comments included design and safety concerns from developing such a site in close proximity to the future roundabout. Other issues included on-site infrastructure issues, compatibility of the development with adjacent development, and general comments about whether it was appropriate to develop this site. City staff has hired BT Engineering to undertake a peer review of the application and to address the concerns from the public in relation to the roundabout in proximity to the development, because they would be considered the expert authority in this matter as it relates to road and traffic safety. So in PTE's correspondence, they have identified the fact that they have considered the subject lands in their initial design requirements of the roads and intersection as a commercial use as opposed to the proposed residential use. So in that correspondence, BTE states that the environmental assessment would therefore have considered a higher generation of traffic occurring at the land subject to the zoning application. Residential development of the subject lands results in lower traffic generation and does not impact the findings of the environmental assessment. And the letter concludes with a statement, In summary, based on our review of the proposed development, it is our professional opinion that the traffic that will be generated can be suitably accommodated and will not interfere with the operation of the roundabout. So the applicant also revised their application after the April 1st meeting and are now proposing 10 semi-detached dwelling units on the site. Their revised application also contained a number of additional documents, including an angular plane review, and, elevations, and a revised site plan, which are included as attachments in the staff report. In addition, the applicant provided responses to the public comments, and these responses are also included in the planning report. So comments received at this public meeting, as well as subsequent written comments, will be considered by the Engineering and Development Services Department in analysis of the application received to amend the City of Belleville zoning bylaw 3014, and a recommendation report will be brought forward upon receipt of all agency and public comments.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application?
Good afternoon. I'm Spencer Hutchison from RFA Planning Consultant. I will speak to a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully everyone has a printout. I have 2 extra copies if anyone needs copies. There's one.
Does everybody else have a copy? Yep, we're good.
Chairman Carr, many members of PAC and citizens. Today is somewhat old, somewhat new. So in the PowerPoint presentation, the first part sort of goes over the history and some things that haven't changed. Basically, it's the same parcel of land, same size, same dimensions. East side of Farnham Road, 1 acre in size, 326 feet of frontage, but we've changed it now from one common element, the shared laneway, and the blocks for townhouses, to 10 blocks of land for semi-detached dwellings. So that would mean 5 buildings split down the middle into a left and right-hand side, which would be a semi-detached dwelling. And in the drawing on the board, you can, on the screen and in the handouts, you can see the 10 lots facing east and the common element for the laneway running parallel to Farnham Road. Just to touch on the official plan, the lands are currently designated commercial in the Belleville official plan, but that has also been interpreted to mean you can allow residential uses. There is no change required to the official plan. The proposal here tonight and in previous occasions meets the official plan. Farnham Road is a collector road, so it's not a local road. It's not an arterial road. It's a medium step, and it's to carry traffic from other subdivisions into town over to 62, over to the other side of the river. And as we all know, a new roundabout is under construction at this hour, and the construction team has returned to work after the winter shutdown. So this is an air photo of the subject property outlined in red, and the surrounding uses to the north, the east, and the west. It's a mixed area. You have some industrial to the north, a residential subdivision to the northeast or in northwest, commercial plaza on the corner, open space owned by the municipality to the south, the river, and then the Moriah Lee Court subdivision. It's interesting to look at the subdivision. I would suggest, being a cul-de-sac enclosed, it is a definite neighborhood with its own identity. This subject property and the houses from 15 to 23, 25 Moriah Lee Court back each other. It's back to back. This proposal for the subject lands will be west facing out to the road. In that sense, it really isn't a neighborhood. It fronts onto a major road, and doesn't have residential across the street. It has a plaza. It has the backyards and the fencing of the Heritage Park subdivision. So you clearly have Moriarty Court and the subject lands, and as it says in the last bullet point, it meets all the low-density criteria. The proposed building has changed. They've been reduced in height to 1 story, and they have been reduced from a block of 4 or 5 units together to 2 units, 2 units, 2 units. So that's the look of the front facade facing Farnham Road and the back facade or rear elevation facing Moriarty Court, the backyards. And you may want to just put your finger by the front of elevation because we'll come back and talk about that in a few minutes. Next up, we have a changed floor plan. This is one of the 5 blocks of semis, 2 units left, right, and there would be 5 of these side by side running down Farnham Road. They are now all 1 bedroom. There's a bedroom on the east side of the block, the unit, and on the west side, there's a den / office / second bedroom, if so desired. So what's happened by the changes through time of the proposed built form, we've basically changed the clientele. Apartment building to townhouses to semis. Basically, these are semis, 1 made bedroom, everything on 1 level, at grade with the street and the shared driveway. You can't zone for people, but the product is going to have an influence on who would be interested. And there was questions in the last presentation about the aging population. This would be a product that would probably interest an aging population rather than the family. And that's just an outcome of the change of the building type. In terms of windows, because windows are sort of crucial, on the east side of these properties, these blocks, there's 2 windows facing east. There's a window off each of the bedrooms and a window / sliding glass door to a deck. So that's, building form would tell you what would be in the building looking out the east windows. There's a garage and a walkway and front doorway on the west side leading to the shared laneway. So continuing on, there's the sort of development site plan. You see the 10 blocks from north to south, the extended driveways leading to a shared common laneway, and at the back there would be decks and trees, fencing along the east property line. There is a sidewalk along Farnham Road which would connect to the city sidewalk that is being constructed as part of the roundabout and Maitland Drive reconstruction. So in the future, there'll be a sidewalk from Farnham Road at Moriarty Court all the way up to the north corner of this property. So it doesn't exist at this hour, so there will be a sidewalk that can be used by the public, potentially by the tenants, residents, but then they have their own laneway. So if they were going to walk south to catch the trail on the Moira, I'm sure they'll just walk down their laneway. They won't walk out to the sidewalk, but it's there. In terms of snow, the asphalt for the shared laneway is 6 meters. The ownership of the common element is 8 meters. So there's 1 meter of grass on either side of the common laneway, which serves a function like a boulevard in the city. It's a place for snow storage. So there's 1 meter wide of snow storage and 6 meters, 20 feet of asphalt. The snow will be pushed north and south. At the north end, there's a common element area that's not in the turning circle or the turning to the street. So snow can be piled there. Same at the south end. There's an area in front and southwest of Block 10 that's in the common area where snow can be pushed. If it's an exceedingly heavy winter, or of course at a certain point in time, it can be trucked away. The good point about this proposal, it's a condominium. So the laneway and the snow plowing and the responsibility for keeping that section of road on Block 11 clear will reside with the condominium corporation. And so they, through their common elements, will, provide the snow plowing and clear the snow if need be. And the other thing is to remember, this is all outside the road allowance. So the sight lines are such that the road, if you actually look where the road is, it's another 2 or 3 meters beyond the subject property. So plenty of space to stop, look, and move out into the traveled section. So snow will not be an issue. The other thing that sort of interestingly falls out of changing the building type, townhouses are under a separate section of the building code than semi-detached dwellings, and that has to do with the size area of the building. By shrinking the building down to 2 units, the common element is no longer required as a fire lane, fire access. Under the building code, it has no jurisdiction. It's just a piece of land. So previously, when you had bigger buildings, the townhouse blocks, the apartment blocks, then you get into sections of the building code that require signed fire routes. That has disappeared because of the new product. So it's just an aside. Sidewalks, no fire route. Let's talk about some more of the official plan if you haven't had enough already. On this next slide, left side are the official plan policies regarding housing. And on the right side of the screen are policies to do with urban design, tree planting. So when we look at the residential policies, we have low, medium, and high density in the city of Belleville. And so the first paragraph at I is the low density, and low density specifies the building type. Single detached or family detached and attached 2-family dwellings fall within the classification of low density. Townhouses were in medium density. Semis are low density. Then it goes on to give us the density. Up to 25 units per hectare net residential density. And there's some more details of defining the net and gross density. But basically, when you take 10 units on 0.42 square meter, 4,200 square meters, that comes out a density of 23.7 units per hectare, which is below your 25. So under density, we've now downgraded from what we talked about in version 1 or iteration 1 to the second one in April to today, that we're low density. We match in form and type the existing development to the east. On the right-hand side, we have the city's policies to do with urban design and to tree planting. As the site plan shows, there will be a mature tree planted on every property between the decks and the property line to the east. In terms of design, if we go to the very last paragraph, A at the bottom, it says, this plan encourages the development of new buildings employing an architectural design that is attractive, functional, and in keeping with the character of the area in which the development is to occur. The new buildings proposed will match. They're functional. And in your handout, I inserted 2 pictures of 2 properties on Memorial Court that abut the subject property. There's 6 in total, but I just picked 2 at random. Again, if I refer you back to where there was the front elevation of the property, and you look at the front elevations of these 2 properties, you'll notice that they're pretty much similar in style, brick facade, central stair entranceway. roof line a little lower, but if you look at that facade and you look at the facade that's proposed, I would suggest, as the official plan says, it's in keeping with the character of the area. It's not higher, or it's not a different style. It's basically two single-family dwellings, single detached dwellings pushed together 5 times. And for reference, I put the back facade of the 2 of the houses, vinyl siding, couple of windows facing the west, and either a deck or a entranceway into the back of the house. It's also interesting to note that because of grade differences, these houses on Marley Court were built with slight elevation. So if you look at the top right picture, the deck in that situation is elevated off the ground, not as much as on the subject property, but definitely elevated so that they sit higher than the ground and any fencing. Now, carrying on, we were asked to do an angular study. I would suggest, and staff can correct me, but I don't think in 20 years the city has ever asked for an angular study before. So this is a bit of a unique situation, but it's been provided. And basically what has happened, on the right-hand side, we have the blocks that are proposed, A to E. And on the right side of that drawing, there's the house numbers from 15 up to 25. And then to the left, corresponding to A, B, C, D, E, which runs from north to south, are the cross-sections from Farnham Road to Memorial Court. And they show the relative elevations of the 5 blocks and the houses to the east of them. What is sort of interesting to note is that the subject property and the properties behind are not at 90 degrees to each other. The common property line runs in a northwest-southeast direction. So you're not looking directly out to the east. You're on an angle in the new semi-detached dwellings. If you look at the house at number 25, existing property at 25, because of the curve in the cul-de-sac, it's a pie-shaped lot, and that property doesn't actually orientate straight west. It actually orientates northwest. And so Block A and the house at 25 are not directly back-to-back staring at each other. They're at angles. And it carries on all the way down. If you look at the orientation of each of the 5 blocks and the existing houses, they're not at 90 degrees to each other. They're at a slight angle. Excuse me. So having said that, when you look at the drawing on the left, an angular study, as it says, angle, you do a 45-degree angle from the back wall of the house, and you go 45 to the sky. You can also do a 45 from the property line and go to the sky. And those are standard criteria, across the province for angular studies. And in both cases, there is no building structure within the angular 45. It's open to the sky. The 45 from the property lines are all there, and as you can see, all the proposed units are below that angle. And if you did the same thing from the property line, all the roofs of the 5 units are below the angular study, or angular line. I mean, your staff can confirm at the next meeting what this angular study means, but basically it meets the criteria of not dominating, not taking away the sky. And when you look at, lastly, the cross-sections, if you look at E, I would suggest the houses existing and proposed are pretty much on the same plane. It gets a little worse as you get north, and then I would argue number A is on an angle, so it's not flat as shown in A, but at an angle. But I would suggest under normal criteria, that is a good situation in terms of compatibility. The zoning bylaw, and to look at the zoning bylaw, we have to get into a little history. We have the criteria on the left side of the dwelling type. various criteria for a zone. Then we have the Thurlow R2 zone. The Thurlow bylaw was enacted by the Council of the Day in August 1987. That's 32 years ago. So the parent Thurlow bylaw has criteria that are not of this century. They are of a different generation. The second column is the City of Belleville zoning bylaw. It's worse. It's from April 77, which is 42 years ago. And these are the standards that the city hold to people coming to the town at the present time. And the only difference is, and it shouldn't be there, is Thurlow is south of the 401 bylaw, or north of the 401, and Belleville zoning bylaw is north. But we've been an amalgamated city for since 98. Yet, just by where you look at a piece of property, you have two standards. Now, to be fair to staff and to be fair to the municipality, they have sent out proposals, which the deadline has closed, and 6 firms have responded to the city's request to create a new, updated, consolidated zoning bylaw. So this will be addressed. So then we have the Thurlow R4-2 zone. What city staff did through the last 10, 15 years, realizing that the original Thurlow bylaws was from 87, they created some new urban zones for all the subdivisions north of the 401. And they called it the R4-2 zone. And the R4-2 zone allows semis and townhouses. And in that column, I provide the criteria for a semi-detached dwelling north of the 401. And the last column is the proposed development and the criteria. So basically, if you compare the proposal to the Thurlow R4-2- zone, every criteria is met except the lot frontage. However, if this property was south of the 401, it would meet the criteria. So a bit in that sense, Belleville's schizophrenic, that you have 2 frontages for semis depending on if you're south or north of 401. The other thing is, when you look down the list, there's 10 properties. When it comes to front yard setback, 9 of the properties meet the 7.6 meters. Only the block 9 is deficient in frontage. When it comes to area, we're requesting 307.7, but again, that is for 1 unit. 9 of the units have over 340 square meters of lot area, which meets both the apparent bylaw and the revised semi-detached bylaw. But when you draft a bylaw, you always have to draft for the worst case scenario. So that's why it says 307.7 for area and 6 meters for the front yard. But 90% of the units meet the bylaw. And I would further argue, the 1 unit that doesn't is because the city acquired land for Farnham Road. And there is a section in the bylaw, both Belleville and Thurlow, that says if the city acquires land, you're not penalized or jeopardized by having to meet different zoning standards. So if you put back in the little triangular piece of land that the city acquired, then you would have the front yard and you would have the lot area. Because if you look at the site plan, you can see how units 9 and 10 have to curve in because of the ongoing construction of Farnham Road. So basically, the proposal here meets the Thurlow bylaws requirements as written today, no special provision for semi-detached dwellings. And just for context, and this was in the last report, this shows all the properties north of the 401 where these provisions apply. So 3 different areas of Settlers Ridge, 2 areas of Heritage Park, and 3 areas of Kenneth Mills have these regulations that we're asking for. So it's common, has been used in Thurlow. Last but not least, Here are two air photos taken within a couple of football throws of the subject property, Chelsea Crescent and Gale Crescent. And if you look at the backyards of all those streets, you have house to house, back to back, at 90 degrees, so they're both looking directly at each other, with decks, with fences, and the separation back wall to back wall is less than what's being proposed for the subject lands. So it's not something new, it's something that's within the area, within a 3-minute walk. So in terms of public consultation, as noted, this is the second public meeting. The developer has also reached out on 2 occasions for open houses to invite the neighborhood in to see the material, one before the April meeting and one in late May for the proposal tonight. Basically, it was to provide all these elevations, site plans, condominium plans, angular study, and copies of all those documents were made available for pickup and to take away. So all the information that we've seen in this presentation was available and was picked up by some of the neighbors. In terms of questions and issues addressed through this process to date, as acknowledged by Mr. Ashton, in his report, there is a 6-page table answering questions up until this point in time. So that's sufficient, shouldn't say sufficient, but it's a lengthy answer to the questions that were provided. In reviewing that material and the letters attached with the agenda, I would suggest that, there's 3 or 4 main themes. The biggest one is traffic. I think it runs through every comment, essentially. In your agenda package, at page 79, bottom left, bottom right corner, page 79, Mr. Ashton has included the 3-page written part from BTE and the drawing and the site plan. BTE was hired, is paid for by the municipality. They have no connection to the applicant at all. And they have been found sufficient that they were now recently retained to do the design work for Bell Boulevard and bring it up to 4 lanes. So respectable engineering firm. And at the bottom of page 80, Mr. Ashton read it. I mean, just to reiterate it, it is our professional opinion as qualified transportation engineers that the traffic that will be generated can be suitably accommodated and will not interfere with the operation of the roundabout. And all above that, for the previous 3 pages, they've gone to every question and answered them. The other thing to point out is BTE is the 4th group of engineers to look at this process, this project. The applicant retained an engineering firm, Ainley, on behalf of the applicant to design and build or show where the roads and servicing. Civil engineers registered in the province of Ontario, they came up with the design. It was submitted to the City of Belleville. It went to the approvals section, who has a PEng on staff whose job is to review development applications for site plans, subdivisions, and new developments. That person has signed off on the project. The city's engineering department, who oversee capital projects, including Build Belleville, who are in charge of Farnham Road, Maitland Drive reconstruction, has PEngs, provincially certified, who looked at this plan and have signed off on it. So all I'd like to say on the traffic issue, 4 different registered engineering firms, individuals, have all agreed this meets the criteria of good engineering. So what more can be added to that? It's not 1, it's 4, and 1 totally under the control of the municipality. The second sort of issue that came up is stormwater. This property slopes from north to south, and water will go to the lowest point. As part of any development application, and this one is no different, there will be a plan of subdivision document / development document drafted, registered on title at the land registry office, with approved engineering drawings as part of the approvals on title. And they will include a grading plan with cross sections, with the calculation of the stormwater today, the stormwater when roads, asphalt, roofs are put down, and how it will be dealt with. And basically, the property will have split zoning, and that is very common. The front part of the house and the driveway and the common laneway will drain westward to the edge of the property in Farnham Road, go south in pipe, cross Moira-Lee Court, and into the Moira River. The side yards, the roof, back part, east part, and the backyards will drain eastwards to a north-south swale designed to carry the water to meet the 100-year standards and the 5-year standards of the Conservation Authority, carry it south to a catch basin in the southeast corner, and then pipe it under the road, under the trail to the river. The Conservation Authority policy is, depending where you are in the watershed, determines how you have to look after the water. The closer you're to the south, to the bay, get the water into the river and into the bay as soon as possible, because the water up north will be coming down. And if you hold the water on site in a pond and let it drain at a slow pace, it will only drain when the surge comes downriver. So in a property like this, conservation policy is to get the water into the river as soon as possible. Having said that, you will have to put in grit separators, which are structures that catch any sand, oil, or water from the paved areas and filter it before it goes into the pipe. There was comments about sidewalks. It's been touched on. There will be a sidewalk on this property. There was a comment about snow removal. Snow will be dealt with. House values. House values lead to taxes. And as we all know, MPACT is a provincial organization that assess every property in the province. And basically, they've gone through multiple reiterations so that in the days of having assessors come around and check individual properties is gone. They do it by computer modeling. And they group municipalities into like areas. And they say this area is all similar. We monitor sales in that area, and whatever happens with the sales, everybody in that block, their assessment will rise or fall, never fall, but will rise according to the model and what's happened in the area. So basically, Moira-Lee Court is treated as one assessment block by the assessment office in Pickering. And basically, they have assigned a value, and then every year or every 4 years when they do their update, they monitor sales, and then they use the percentage change in the sales as to the block. This property, I would suggest, has features and location that don't equate to the cul-de-sac. But these house sales will influence the weighting in the cul-de-sac. So these houses, which will be sold at higher prices just because there'll be 2019, 2020 houses, their values will be up. The model will see the prices are up, and the prices behind will go up. And I mean, you can get that from MPACT, but I used to advise MPACT when I worked for the city on helping them assess properties. And then last but not least, and this is compatibility. We've looked at the angular study. We've looked at the built form. Basically, you have low-density houses against low-density houses. You have like neighbors against like neighbors. You're probably, in all likelihood, going to see 2 people in all these units based on the built form. And as I said, we've already provided 6 pages of answers. In your report, you have the response to the circulation of this application to agencies. That is on page 23. It's interesting to note at the top of page 23, both school boards, private, public and separate, were circulated this application. They comment about their issues. No issue about busing or access for students. Now, in the middle of the page, the chief building official was circulated. He didn't flag any issues. The second last paragraph under internal development or circulation, the fire and rescue chief department commented no concerns. Basically, all the folks in the business for the city have said this project works. There's no fire issue, there's no building issue, there's no school issue. So basically, to wrap up, this meets the official plan, it meets the provincial policy statement. It is consistent with the PPS, and it's consistent with the thorough zoning. Sorry, it's been a long evening so far, and you got miles still to go, but any questions?
Is there any questions to Mr. Hutchison? Councillor Culhane.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hutchison, one of the issues that was raised in the latest protest that we all received is the issue of the common element drive and potential for needing to widen that road. The city's plan requiring a 30-meter right-of-way be protected northward along Farnham Road. How would that be addressed?
If you go to the bottom of page 79 from your consultant BTE, the proposed plans for 427 Farnham Road do not propose buildings within the future beyond the 20-year horizon. Therefore, the 30-meter right-of-way is protected. So this plan meets the future plans for Farnham Road as laid out by your consultant.
And you would say that meets that requirement in perpetuity? Forever?
As far as they, and again, if you look at the study, and your staff can confirm this, the consultant looked to built out. So their firm has looked at everything north of the river, east of 62, up to the urban boundary that was referred to. So that whole build out, all the rest of the subdivisions, up to Scott Street on the west side, they looked at build out. So the worst case scenario, and this works according to their report.
Thank you for your report. It's very detailed, and I appreciate the effort. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the application? And a third time, anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application? Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition of the application? Please come forward and state your name.
Fact is, it's a very small area. There's a roundabout
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? I see lots of hands. The gentleman right there. Is that microphone on? If you could just press the button to activate the microphone there, I don't think. There we go.
I just had a hip operation. Sorry about that. My name is Truel Truelson. I have lived for 12 years at 47 Chelsea Crescent in the Sneeko subdivision there, and I've spent 12 years coming out of Simcoe trying to get onto the road, and lately sometimes you wait 5 minutes or a little bit more so you can even get on the road. So I'm concerned about the roundabout, what it'll do to the traffic pattern. School buses will stop somewhere in the vicinity, let kids off, put kids on. So I think I'm going to register as I'm opposing it totally.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Councillor Carr and members of the Planning Committee. My name is Diane Turrell, and I reside at 3 Bristol Place in the Canniff Mills development. I made a presentation at the first meeting concerning the proposed development on Farnham Road, and have followed with interest the subsequent modifications and studies. I was unable to attend the previous meeting because I was out of the province. Although the current proposal does address many of the concerns raised by residents, I have 2 major issues that I want to present. The first, and the most important, that I think the city needs to address, is the offer of a 5% cash in lieu of parkland to the city of Belleville. I am appalled that our city would consider reducing the amount of parkland in our official plan. I do understand that there is a history in residential development in Belleville where the cash in lieu parkland, that the cash in lieu of parkland was frequently used. The impact of these arrangements was that we have less green space and fewer parks, causing residents to drive rather than walk to parks. This is another negative environmental impact of reduced green space. In 2019, the City of Belleville's response to the negative impact of climate change and environmental degradation should be to strengthen our focus on the need to maintain and increase green space. We should refuse this 5% cash in lieu of parkland to the city. We have a new city council that it has demonstrated that it is not business as usual. There are countless examples of increased transparency and timely responses to residents' concerns. It is now the time to eliminate a 5% cash in lieu of parkland option to developers. I have a possible solution to suggest. Build 8 townhouses on this property and use the sections designated as Unit 9 and 10 for parkland. Such a modification would demonstrate to residents that the City of Belleville highly values green space and is taking appropriate positive action. This modification would provide a safe area behind the open space adjacent to Moira Lee and the traffic circle. Residents can enjoy this open space and then cross Moira Lee safely to gain access to the trail along the river. My second concern is the BT engineering study of traffic. Now, I must say that I listened with interest to the former comments about the credentials of this company. However, these townhouses each have garages and room for 2 cars in their individual driveways. I would suggest that in many cases there would be 2 vehicles exiting and entering the condo property at high traffic density times. Thus, I would suggest that rather than using 10 cars, they should be using 20 cars to determine traffic density patterns. I would also suggest that the traffic patterns used for commercial properties would likely be distributed throughout the day and not concentrated at rush hour periods. In fact, the traffic flow to commercial sites would likely be lighter at these peak times. In summary, I question the validity of the engineering traffic study results. I also ask whether there might be a conflict of interest to have the engineering company that has a contract with the city to develop the roundabout to also do the advanced traffic and impact study of the proposed residential property. It would seem that the engineering company might have a vested interest in demonstrating that this proposed development does not interfere with the traffic flow in the vicinity of the roundabout. Thank you for the opportunity to challenge this proposal as it is currently presented. And I do have copies if anyone wants them.
Okay, yeah. If you want to just hand them there at the end of the table. Is there any questions at all from the committee members? No? Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm moving to the second row now.
My name's Tammy Robson. I live at 23 Moira Lee Court. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to present our amended submission in regards to the above noted matter after reviewing the report PP 2019-45 presented by managers of planning and approvals dated June 3rd, 2019. I'm here yet again to present my third submission in regards to this parcel of land as a very concerned property owner and City of Belleville taxpayer, specifically the third application to consider the amendment to zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended as set out in the City of Belleville Notice of Public Meeting. I would like to point out that several members of this committee and other council members were present and voted to unanimously deny the last development application in 2017. This is the third official application for development of this small parcel of land since it was sold in June 2017 and continues to be a very controversial situation, not only in Caniff Mills and surrounding developments, but the development in general. Yet here we are again debating the development of this parcel of land. The public is fully aware that this less than 1 acre parcel of land has a very controversial history, including conviction of conflict of interest involving the sale since it was sold to local developers by the Christopher brothers. After the developer took possession, a small sliver of land was sold back to the City of Belleville around October 2017 in order to relocate the hydropole and services to accommodate the pending construction of a traffic circle. The first application for rezoning was refused by City Council on December 11, 2017. None of the applications have addressed the significant safety issues and lot drainage issues that have been raised by local people living around this area. I might note that these complaints are not coming only from Moira Lee residents, but also Caniff Mills and Heritage Park. Clearly, on the angular plane review of the proposed 5 townhomes, there is a significant and very deep swale shown. These swales could be landscaped and filled in if this project proceeds, which will flood the backyards on Moira Lee Court. This serious and damaging problem has already been experienced with the swale between Simcoe and Moira Lee. A homeowner has filled in the swale and flooded the basement of a Moira Lee resident, doing significant damage and causing the Moira Lee resident to go to great expense to repair. Committee members making this decision and the city staff and developers should be aware of this. As mentioned at the December 2017 PAC meeting, there has been substantial development in this area over the past 17 years. With the massive building of hundreds of homes in Caniff Mills and Heritage Park subdivisions, we have experienced firsthand the impact that all of the development in this area has created for all families residing here. Poor planning in this area has extremely large subdivisions, having minimal entrances, and most traffic from these areas exiting onto Farnham Road. The roundabout construction is now underway. The site plan included with the notice of application clearly shows that any traffic that would exit from this new development at the south end, across from the Consumer's Carpet loading exit, would impede traffic flow from the north arm of the roundabout. The median from this arm would end a short distance from both of these drives. The photos included with my submission in April 2019 clearly show that currently, without such development of townhouses or roundabout, there is already a serious safety concern and problems with traffic flow. With the daily and weekly deliveries happening at the commercial properties on the west and east side of Farnham Road, with a median in the roadway and 2 proposed drives from the development across the road, this is surely to be a further hazard and cause significant and unsafe traffic delays, as I have seen firsthand when taking the photos. And queuing of traffic, which the Farnham Road Master Plan 2015 states the roundabout is expected to reduce. If the businesses located on the west side of Farnham Road are unable to have their products delivered to them in a safe manner by a transport truck, there is also a possibility they could go out of business if this proposed building is allowed to go ahead. Due to the fact that they are tenants in a building owned by someone else, they are unable to protest this development as it relates to their business. The other item worth mentioning is if the roundabout was required to enable flow of the ever-increasing traffic volumes on this road, why are there no proper sidewalks proposed? Many people who live in Heritage Park walk down this busy stretch of road in order to get to the trail system that runs along the river. This is a safety concern for all pedestrians. From plans that I have seen to date, the only sidewalks planned for are short segments of walkway around the traffic circle. The proposed plan indicates a common element drive. My concern is, where will the snow be plowed to on this drive? If we have a winter with significant snowfall, my concern would be that the snow would be pushed to the north or south ends of the drive, causing reduced visibility for those exiting at either entrance and a significant safety issue. The previous proposal stated the city's plan also requires a 30-meter right-of-way be protected northward along Farnham Road to allow for any future road widening to accommodate additional development further north. This requirement forces development on the subject lands eastward to maintain opportunity of future road widening. What happens to the common element drive arrangement when the road is required to be widened sometime in the future? Should this issue not be dealt with at this time before any development on the property? At the neighborhood open house hosted by the developer on May 22, 2019, visitors were provided with several different documents regarding official plan density and zoning bylaw requirements. The zoning bylaw document provided was an attempt at comparing zoning requirements for Thurlow R2, Belleville R4, Thurlow R42, and the proposed development, and how this developer's proposal met with the requirements. I understand that these are all zoning requirements for a semi-detached building. This document gives a misleading appearance to the public who may not be aware of zoning bylaws that everything in this proposal meets the regulations, as it shows that it meets most of the requirements in either R4 or R42 zoning. Why even show these? Another issue with the application and its supporting documentation is the aerial imagery of Gale Crescent and Chelsea Court rear yard setbacks. This area is a new plan of subdivision with R120 low-density zoning. Therefore, why is it even included in this proposal? It is not an accurate presentation. This proposal is asking for changes to zoning from rural residential to R2 low-density. It does not meet the zone requirements for R2, which is why the developer is asking for the special provisions of reduced front yard setback, reduced lot frontage, and increased lot coverage. As noted in Section 6, Zone Provisions 6.2, Low-Density Residential Type 2 R2 Zone, under Special Provisions 6.2.4, re-subsection 5.140.1, R2-3, the minimum lot frontage, semi-detached dwelling house is 9.7 meters. This proposal states a minimum lot frontage of 9.23 meters and does not even meet the minimum lot frontage as stated in special provisions. I find it frustrating that regular city taxpayers are expected to adhere to very stringent bylaws when it comes to construction of a fence, deck, or shed on private property. Yet, city developers are permitted to request changing the zoning bylaws in order to permit them to build a structure so it can be made to fit in a particular location. Why even have the regulations if they are allowed to be changed at the whim of any developer? I feel confident if I personally was the owner of this parcel of land and presented this proposal, it would not have been even considered since it doesn't meet the zoning bylaw. The other document provided was a page titled Official Plan Density from 3.10.2 Residential Policies, where a definition of low density is provided. It goes on to state that based on the 10 dwellings being proposed on this 4,227 square meters, it equates to a net residential of 23.7 units per hectare, which is under the suggested density of 25 units per hectare. Also, this document points out that the standards set out in these definitions should not be considered firm. Circumstances or conditions will exist where the number of dwelling units permitted for a given area of land should be either higher or lower than defined in order to address other policies of this plan. The townhomes proposed will be single-story with a walkout basement. I believe that the developer is trying to show that these buildings are in keeping with the neighborhood on Moirley Court. They are not. These single-story units will tower above all of the properties they back onto. The decks will be at the level of our roof lines. The embankment running east towards our property will vary in angulation, but all causing significant runoff directed towards our land. In reviewing the report for this development over the weekend, it was noted that BT Engineering was selected by the city to complete a peer review of the application and address the concerns from the public because they would be considered the expert authority in this matter as they previously completed the environmental assessment and road design work for the roundabout. I believe that this review was not conducted in an impartial manner and is yet another poor decision made in regards to this controversial parcel of land. This firm was, or currently is, under contract with the City of Belleville. Why would this firm say anything negative about the project when in doing so may jeopardize obtaining any future city contracts? It would have been a more objective report if an engineering firm with no local connections was provided the opportunity to review. I will not address each of the concerns or issues that staff have attempted to address in this report for the sake of time. There are many instances where the responses to the concerns do not make sense, and many that have been generalized and removed from the context in which the individual who initially raised the concern intended. All responses to the concerns or issues definitely have the appearance of being in favor of the developer. I encourage all committee members to review all previous submissions related to this development dating back to December 2017. I would also like to point out to the committee the liability potential if this project is allowed to proceed. If in the future an incident occurs that results in injury or damage to an individual or someone's property after the public has raised so many valid points in regards to the issues in individual submissions, it could possibly put the City of Belleville in another conflict situation and yet again burden the city taxpayers with an unnecessary expense. There are two things to consider when making a decision such as this that will have lasting implications for those that live near to or use this particular roadway. These are considering the factual data presented and logic. Not everything that appears to work on paper will work in reality, nor is it the logical or the right thing to do. This is a very unique intersection that has its challenges. Where else in the province is there a situation such as this? Local residents have asked members of this committee and also other council members if there's an opportunity to purchase back this land that was sold in such a controversial way. Given this history, the right thing to do would be for the city to make the purchase and establish it as a much-needed green space along this particularly densely populated stretch of road for all who live here to enjoy. I ask that elected officials and city employees reject this proposal for the last time.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? Yeah, please come forward.
My name's Peter. I don't actually live here yet, but I have purchased a lot on Canafton Road when I retire. I'll be moving to your municipality. My mom lives in the Chelsea Crescent, and she also asked me to have a look at all this, and to me it's all, I'm not technically inclined with all the details of how a city plans property, but my idea would be, why not take that piece of land, since it's causing so much complexity and controversy, and just turn it into a green space, maybe put a basketball court there so the kids can have a place to play. I live right now in Brampton, and they have done that with green spaces. They've added like a basketball court where kids can play in the center, and then they stay off the street, and that would solve everybody's problem. I know there's so much land, and in Brampton, in places like this, I see them trying to ram as many houses into a small piece of land as possible, and I can see the congestion, and it's getting to a point now where it takes an hour and a half to get anywhere if I want to do some errands. And that's why my idea is to move to a smaller town when I retire, and then I don't have that complexity, which I like here. Everything's about 10 minutes away. So if you want to keep it simple, is there not land further up where they can build something like a bit further north, and then you haven't got that controversy, and leave this as a green space? That's my opinion. I don't know what you guys think about it, but that's what I would do with it. That way there's no complexity. It doesn't get ground up forever and everybody will be happy in the end. And maybe there's some other land that the developer could use further up to build this kind of concept of house for somebody. A one-bedroom, I don't know if, even I, as a retiree, I wouldn't want a one-bedroom personally, but that's my personal opinion. I still would like to have a 3-bedroom home with a hobby room and things like that. So, just, that's all I have to say, but.
Okay.
Just something.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? Yes, please come forward.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Robertson. I live on Moira Court. They had mentioned about the busing. I'm guessing they must have some inside information where there's no kids going to be living in those homes at all. There's not going to be a single mother with a child or a father with a child, and no busing problems. I don't know about anybody else here. If you've been down that road recently, even before the roundabout was started, there's no sidewalks, big guts at the side where the water has taken away the roads, etc., and you want to pick a child up there. Well, then they thought they would send them up farther up Farnham Road. I don't know many parents or grandparents that would allow their child on that road, as busy it is, to walk up those roads. And then if there's no buses, or if there is buses, they have to stop in front of there somewhere, even one spot, because then all cars must stop in front or behind 20 meters. That's law. That's going to stop the roundabout. Have you ever seen what happens when a roundabout comes to a dead stop? It's not nice. So them saying that there's going to be no problems with the busing situation, I don't know how they came to that conclusion, because if you just think about it, there's obviously going to be at least one child there that's going to be picked up and dropped off. And if so, there's problems with the roundabout. The other thing I wanted to mention was, I don't understand that the road, when the roundabout is finished, is there not going to be some sort of finishing of that road to make that hill of Farnham better than the way it is looking now? And from what I remember, there's supposed to be an expropriation of land. And that's supposed to go into, from where we can figure, the middle part of that common roadway in front of all of those homes. So if it's halfway there, all the homes are sold, all being lived in, now you people want to fix the road up, want to make it nicer, because so many homes have been built up in that area. Now you have to expropriate the land. You do, it gets in the middle of that road. Well, what happens to that road now? City now has to pay for it to get moved back and take more of the front of those homes, land? Or do you just now, okay, scrap it, and we have 10 driveways going out onto to the road? Because at some point in time, if you've looked at that road, you are going to have to do something with it. And the amount of cars, there's 500 more homes going up there, that it's going to need to be improved, and you're going to have to think about it. Is it the taxpayers who's going to have to pay for that new road and whatever you have to give the people living there to compensate for the losing of the front of their properties? And the last 3 homes at the end, 8, 9, and 10 blocks, they don't have much room to lose anymore if you've got to expropriate land. That was my concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. My name is Brian Boulay. I'm a homeowner on Moira League Court, and I guess I want to start off 25, 6, 13, 10. Those are the numbers that have come to the committee as different proposals for this little piece of land. Nobody talked much about the 6. That was, I believe, turned down by the city from the developer. It didn't even get to committee level and to the public. So I just want to mention that there have been many versions of this piece of land getting developed. I would like to point out the picture that's on the screen. It does tell many words. If you look at the properties on Moira Lee and count up how many houses there are, you can get an idea visually, and I know the developer presented earlier that they met all the many requirements or were very close, but I don't know, in my vision, that looks pretty crammed to me. When you look at 6 or 7 houses on Moira Lee and comparatively look at the 10 properties being proposed, significant amendments to lot coverage and setbacks and so on. So I wanted to hit home that point. Tammy mentioned about the water. I'm not going to get into that other than, again, the builder's drawing, the angular study that they did, hits home the point that there is a significant swale there and potential problems. Okay. We talk about the roundabout. Most people are in favor of the roundabout. I am personally. But what it is going to do is change traffic flow to being constant. Traffic is not going to be stopping at a 4-way stop anymore. It is continuous. So those proposed 10 houses, whether they are older people living in them, they may have grandkids showing up and playing in yards. Those yards are not very big. If kids are in a driveway doing something with chalk, playing hopscotch, what happens if somebody ventures pretty close to the road with constant traffic flowing north and south? So, and also I want to just close that, again, the builder saying that they met all kinds of various things, but I believe the notification I got from the city for tonight's session indicated that there were amendments to reduced lot frontage, increased lot coverage, reduced yard setback. So, you know, that was dated May 10th, so I'm assuming, you know, the city's telling me something fairly accurate here. So just wanted to mention that too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition of the application? Yeah, please come forward.
My name is John Scott. I live at 19 Moira Lee Court, and I think for the most part my neighbors have presented most of the facts, but the one thing I did want to point out was on the drawing that's up here right now is because it's an aerial view, you can't really tell the slope of the road along with how much of a curve is actually there, and the visibility from the top where the entranceway will be to the proposed development to the roundabout is not that far, and the visibility for being able to look to the bottom of the hill to see who's coming off the roundabout is going to be very difficult. And with vehicles traveling at 60 kilometers an hour, that's 88 feet per second. So it doesn't take long, you know, to be able to react to something like that. If you can't react in time, I guarantee you there will be accidents here. And to the point that's been made by some of my neighbors, that is a lawsuit waiting to happen. So the only other thing I wanted to point out too was I was always taught that if you have nothing to hide, you don't need to put a spin on anything. And the proposal that we had earlier that showed Gale Crescent and a couple of the other properties, and we're trying to compare that to the elevations in our property. Well, that was an aerial view again. And those properties are all built flat. So you're not comparing apples to apples when it comes to the elevations and being able to see into neighbors' backyards and so on, that's not an issue up there because that's flat area. No one is elevated above anyone else. Whereas with this proposal, it's been pointed out that the fence line won't even be high enough for the balconies that are going to be presented there. So in essence, people will be looking right down into your backyard, and it's a total privacy issue along with everything else. So obviously I'm in opposition to that, and I'll let my neighbor's words speak for the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition of the application? Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition of the application? And I'll ask one more time. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition of the application? Thank you. Can I get a motion to refer to the other part of the meeting? Councillor Sanderson, Councillor Kelly, all in favor? Motion's carried. 3.3, notice of complete application, introductory public meeting for application for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 10245 as amended, 9 and 11 and 13 Wilkie Street, City of Belleville, County of Hastings, file number B-77-1084. Owner applicant is Mark Glassford. Mr. Ashton.
So for this application, the applicant had purchased the property a few years ago. Do you want me to just hold on? Okay. So the applicant had purchased the property a few years ago, and the subject site contains a number of buildings with dwelling units. So these units have been built over time, with some being identified as legal non-conforming. The applicant proposes to rezone the subject lands from Open Space 1 zone to Open Space 4 zone with special provisions to recognize the existing 9 dwelling units on the 2 properties. By recognizing the existing buildings and their uses, this will provide, in essence, a hard cap as to what is existing as of this date until such time in the future when the property can be redeveloped to more closely align with the official plan. Comments received at this public meeting, as well as subsequent written comments, will be considered by the Engineering and Development Services Department in analysis of the application received to amend the City of Belleville zoning bylaw. And a recommendation report will be brought forward upon receipt of all agency and public comments.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application? Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application? Okay. Sure.
I'm not really sure what to say, but
Okay, that's fine. If you don't have any comments, any questions from the committee members? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming, though. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the application? Is there anyone wanting to speak in opposition of the application? Anyone in opposition of the application? And a third time, anyone in opposition of the application? No? Seeing none? Can I get a motion to refer to the Planning Advisory Committee? Councillor Sanderson, Councillor Culhane, all in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to 3.14, in a notice of complete application, introductory public meeting for application for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended, 1437 and 1455 Mudcat Road, former township of Thurlow, now City of Belleville, County of Hastings, file number B-77-1085. Applicant is Clint Hamilton and owner is Robert Rollins. Mr. Ashton.
Okay, so this application is to rezone the property as a condition of consent for application B819. So the retained parcel containing the surplus dwelling would be rezoned to rural residential zone, and the severed parcel would be rezoned prime ag with special provisions to prohibit future severances. So the lands are designated as agricultural lands as opposed to rural lands in the official plan, and provincial policies require protection of these lands as a resource, which is also reflected in our official plan policies. There are allowances for surplus dwellings to be severed, and so the decision of the Committee of Adjustment in requiring the rezoning is consistent with both the provincial policy and the city's official plan. Comments received at this public meeting, as well as subsequent written comments, will be considered by the Engineering and Development Services Department in analysis of the application received to amend the City of Belleville zoning bylaw, and a recommendation report will be brought forward.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the application? Anyone wanting to speak in favor of the application? Third time, anyone wanting to speak in favor of the application? Is there anyone wanting to speak in opposition of the application? Anyone wanting to speak in opposition? And finally, anyone wanting to speak in opposition of the application? All right, seeing none, I get a motion to refer this to the Plan Advisory Committee. Councillor Kelly, the seconder, Councillor Williams, all in favor? Motion's carried. If I get a motion to adjourn this portion of the meeting. Councillor Kelly, Councillor Culhane, all in favor? Motion's carried. So moving on to the Plan Advisory Committee. Note attendance, everyone's here. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. Seeing none, I need confirmation of the minutes of the City Council Planning Committee meeting and Planning Advisory Committee meeting held on May 6, 2019. Ms. Brown, Mr. Baltutis, all in favor? Motion's carried. No deputations, Mr. Clerk. Correspondence. 6.1, referrals from the public meeting. Notice of revised applications and introductory public meeting for applications for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended and proposed plan of subdivision and plan of common elements condominium 427 Farnham Road, Forward Township of Thurlow, now City of Belleville, County of Hastings, file number B-77-1079 and 12 CD-19001. Owner is Heritage Park JV. Applicant agent is RFA Planning Consultant Incorporated. Manager of Policy Planning and Manager of Approvals, report number PP-2019-45. The resolution reads that report number PP-2019-45 dated June 3rd, 2019 regarding notice of revised applications and introductory public meeting for zoning amendment, plan of subdivision, plan of common elements, condominium 427 Farnham Road, City of Belleville, be received as information and that staff report back at such time as input from the public commenting agencies and municipal departments has been received, assessed, and addressed to the satisfaction of the Engineering and Development Services Department. Moved by Ms. Brown, Mr. Joyce. Any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? That motion's carried. 6.2, notice of complete application and introductory public meeting for application for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 10-245 as amended, 911 and 13 Wilkie Street, City of Belleville, County of Hastings, file number B-77-1084. Owner applicant is Mark Glassford. The policy planning report number PP-2019-42. The resolution reads that report number PP-2019-42 dated June 3rd, 2019 regarding notice of complete application and introductory public meeting for application for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 10-245 as amended, 911 and 13 Wilkie Street, City of Belleville, County of Hastings be received as information and that staff report back at such time as input from the public, commenting agencies and municipal departments has been received, assessed, and addressed to the satisfaction of the Engineering and Development Services Department. Moved by Councillor Sandison, seconded by Councillor Kelly. Any questions or comments on that? All in favor? Motion's carried. 6.3, notice of complete application and introductory public meeting for application for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended, 1437 and 1455 Mudcat Road, former Township of Thurlow, now City of Belleville, County of Hastings, file number B-77-1085. Applicant is Clint Hamilton. Owner is Robert Rowlands. Policy planning report number PP-2019-43. The resolution reads that report number PP-2019-43 dated June 3rd, 2019 regarding notice of complete application and introductory public meeting, application for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended, 1437 and 1455 Mudcat Road, Farmer Township of Thurlow, now City of Belleville, County of Hastings be received as information and that staff report back at such time as input from the public, commenting agencies and municipal departments has been received, assessed, and addressed to the satisfaction of the Engineering and Development Services Department. Moved by Councillor Sandison, seconded by Mr. Baltutis. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Motion's carried. On to reports. 7.1. Recommendation report for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended, 4807 Old Highway 2, City of Belleville, County of Hastings, file number B-77-1080. Applicant owner is Ray and Jean O'Neill. Policy Planners Report Number PP-2019-40. Resolution reads that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends the following to City Council: that application B-77-1080 to amend zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended for lands described as 4807 Old Highway 2, Belleville, County of Hastings, be approved as follows. That zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended be amended by rezoning the severed parcel from prime agricultural PA zone to rural residential RR zone, and that the retained parcel from prime agricultural PA zone to rural RU zone to fulfill a condition of consent for application B9-19. Moved by Mr. Joyce, seconded by Mr. Jennings. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Motion's carried. 7.2, recommendation report for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended, 288 Pine Hill Crescent, City of Belleville, County of Hastings. File number is B-77-1082. Applicant is Tom Reed. Agent is Eleanor McAvoy. Owner is Tom Reed and Eleanor McAvoy. Policy Planners Report number PP-2019-41. Resolution reads that Planning Advisory Committee recommends the following to City Council: that application B-77-1082 to amend zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended for land described as 288 Pine Hill Crescent, Belleville, County of Hastings, be approved as follows. That zoning bylaw number 3014 as amended be amended by rezoning the severed parcel from prime agricultural PA zone to rural residential RR zone, and the retained parcel from prime agricultural PA zone to rural RU zone to fulfill a condition of consent for application B13-19. Need a mover? Mr. Baltutis, Mr. Jennings. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Motion's carried. 7.3, recommendation report for proposed amendment to zoning bylaw number 10-245 as amended, re 125 South Church Street, City of Belleville, County of Hastings. File number B-77-1083. Applicant owner is Myers Creek Development Group. Agent is Joe Chinook. Manager of Policy Planning Report number PP-2019-38. The resolution reads that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends the following to City Council: that zoning bylaw number 10-245 as amended be amended by rezoning the subject lands described as 125 South Church Street from general commercial C2 to non-retail commercial C5 zones to general commercial C2-49 zone with special provisions to a methadone dispensary, and that a development agreement be required to address both lighting and garbage receptacles, and that staff be directed to update the city's 3 general zoning bylaws in a manner that is consistent with the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms regarding the regulation of methadone dispensaries. Moved by Councillor Sandison, seconded by Mr. Baltutis. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion's carried. Number 8, information matters, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment report, monitoring report, and a report to June 3rd, 2019. Can I get a motion to receive? Mr. Baltutis, Councillor Culhane, any questions on that information? Seeing none, all in favor to receive? Motion's carried. Any general business or inquiries? Seeing none, I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Kelly, Ms. Brown, all in favor? Motion's carried.